Hello, my name is Matthew East. I've been working in the NDIS for several years now, and I have practiced as a provisional psychologist and behaviour therapist. I need to caution though that my registration is not currently renewed, although I'm going through the process of getting back to completing all my certifications. So until recently, I was working for an organisation that we can call Henny's Health Group. It's a very large healthcare conglomerate. It's one of the largest in Australia. It's actually international. They've got offices across the world, including the United Kingdom and Australia. And I was employed within one of the smaller companies within this organisation that we're going to call Get Scared Kids. This is a company which is oriented towards working with children and younger adults. The person who is the CEO of this particular part of the company is a woman I call Brenda, and I worked for a regional manager under her, both of whom were trained as developmental psychologists, not positive behaviour support practitioners. Although they may have some minor certification in that area, they were not primarily behaviour therapists. They were child psychs. The person who decided the best thing to do with my skill set and placed me in this company was a man that we're going to call Ed, who's the group CEO for Henny's Health Group, where Henny is the ultimate primary investor and director of the organisation. Those aren't their real names. I try to avoid directly naming people in my videos because it gives people a little bit of leeway. And the purpose of these videos is primarily to draw attention to systemic issues. Although, while these people certainly have much to answer for, and I'd love some form of justice to take place because of due to their horrific behaviour. There's been a lot of casualties to their behaviour, including myself. The purpose of this video is to highlight systemic issues within the NDIS and wider society and healthcare. So, my background is working with complex behaviours and complex presentations. I started off working with people coming out of juvenile detention and people with very serious psychological issues who are in the community. People with 2 or 3 different diagnoses. They identify as being fucked up, and I think whilst I genuinely view people as unique, beautiful things, the conditions they have make life unbearable for them much of the time. They don't, if there's money which is available for them through the government or some other service, they're not really able to utilize it often because they don't have the mental capacities to do it, or they've got systemic issues such as poverty or their disability stops them from being able to advocate for themselves. And this means whoever ends up working with them is going to dictate how their life turns out. This is a different population to children, although child psychs in the NDIS space do need to play a significant advocacy role and have the complications of working in family units. This is not the kind of work which should be done by child psychology companies. And Ed, in his brilliance, saw my skill set, saw my background, and thought, hey, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to make sure every one of your bosses is a childcare, like a play school provider with several degrees, right? And that's not an insult to child psych. It's brilliant work, but it's not the same degree of you're not as responsible for violence, and you're not as responsible for hectic situations if you're a child psych compared to the stuff that I've been doing, although it is incredibly complicated and I would say equally difficult. I say this because I've done both. What I did is that I would manage clients coming off heroin as a behaviour therapist, or manage clients who are violent to themselves or other people, and a large amount of that is interpreting their behaviours and advocating for them, particularly non-verbal persons who may use aggression as a means of communicating their needs because they can't verbalize it. It's a lot of my work is advocacy. It's not trying to control people. It's advocating for them and seeing how we can get their needs met without having to use restrictive practices such as restraints such as isolation, straitjackets, we call them Houdini jackets now, and other measures like that. It's primarily advocacy. But returning to what I'm saying, I'm working with this population where all my management are child psychs and can't do the work, whilst at the same time doing child psychology on the side, which I really enjoyed, bizarrely enough. Never done it too much of it before. I found that, like, because there's a significant, there's not too many people who are child psychs in the NDIS, there's massive demand for that kind of work. And that's where we're going to be able to go back for, that's a term we need to circle back to, demand. Supply and demand. Because there aren't a lot of services which orientate themselves towards the NDIS. The NDIS is a difficult bureaucracy to work with because there's a lot of rules, and they aren't as receptive to market forces as other industries. For example, Medicare, there's a system where you can see a psychologist by going to your doctor and getting what's called a mental health care plan. This mental health care plan allows you to see a psychologist for 10 sessions, which are heavily subsidized, and there's sometimes a gap. Well, the NDIS has something called the price guide, and in that price guide, you can pay around NDIS providers are forced to charge only $150 per hour of service. Now that might seem like a bit, but then you've got all the administrative costs, and you've got all the costs associated with having your software, and you've got these very highly trained healthcare professionals. They're not cheap either. So because of this $150 per hour thing that we have in the book, and because of the inevitable incentives of healthcare providers to, make money, these are for-profit organizations, they find ways to game this system. So instead of a person just seeing a psychologist for their session, what they did is invent this scheme where every client is sold a report. Now, a report takes around 8 billable hours, so 8 times 150, it's a bit of money. It's 2 hours where we interview the participant and 6 hours where we write that report. There is a genuine need for these reports in some instances because it communicates to the NDIS what that participant needs. Unfortunately though, it's a really great way to make a lot of money is to sell these reports, and that's what HHG did, or particularly the Get Scared Kids brand. So what would happen is that I'd have a client who might have $1,600 budgeted by the NDIS to provide therapy for them. Well, that gets used up instantly because it takes around $1,500 to write one of these reports, and by the end of it, there's not any money left to provide the actual therapy service. So all this money budgeted to the participants just evaporates overnight, and no actual capacity is built in the participant. Now, there are some systemic problems at Henny's Health Group, and I'll get back to that in a minute. But I need to tell you first why I'm not working there anymore. It's because I clued onto this, complained about it to my boss, and then they stopped talking to me. Because we ended up charging, I looked at the ratios, around $1,400 per hour of therapy. When you added all the extra services that my management was able to keep tacking on to the client's NDIS plan, through the blank check that they use when these participants signed what are called service agreements. They basically said, hey, you can use all the money in this category, do what you want with it. And that's what we did. We found ways to get through that money as fast as possible, and then had the gall to ask the NDIS for more using these reports. Returning back to issues at Henny's Health Group. So, originally I called this video, or at least the previous version of it, Henny's Health Group and the Corporate Religion. And that's a good description of the culture at Henny's Health Group. This is part of it anyway. A lot of it goes back to a man called Ed. So Ed is the group CEO. He's the linchpin which holds the culture of this organization together. He's a very charismatic figure. You know, he knows how to talk, he knows how to get people to laugh and get people to think he's a great person. These are skills that you just need to have when you're in leadership. In fact, uh, but part of the culture which was around this company was this kind of infighting between different people and constantly trying to prove to this guy that, hey, you're a great employee. It wasn't moral leadership in the organization. There wasn't someone who was calling out what the values of should be and describing ethical conduct. It was just the way he managed it is that he had his little CEOs sort of having these little infighting and all this organizational politics trying to impress him and be in his good graces. And he would shower particular CEOs with compliments. Brenda was one of these people. And so Brenda invented this system, to my understanding, where we would produce these reports, we would be able to drain the NDIS funds as fast as possible. Ed looks at it, Ed goes, damn, you're making us a lot of money, you go, sweetheart. But it was more sinister than that. It became part of the corporation's ideology. So every time we had a group meeting across the company, the figures for the company, how the company was doing profit-wise, were discussed. So, and there is something which occurred here which I call the corporate gospel, the corporate prosperity gospel. It's kind of like a religious thing, because there would be a speech, it would be like, every dollar here represents good we have done for the community, right? Because you don't get paid unless you're doing work. And for a little while I thought this was great, because I've worked in organizations which have been charities where everyone's just sat on their ass and done nothing, because there wasn't any profit incentive and there wasn't any incentive to be productive, so nothing really happened. But things happened in Henny's Health Group. We drained the government of a shit ton of money by doing works which didn't produce any outcomes for the community, and we did this for a long period of time, and if I'm honest, stole a lot of money. Or may as well have stolen. If you're selling something to someone and it provides no real service, come on, like, let's call it for what it is. This is con man shit. And this is the standard in the NDIS, and this is the standard when we, for a lot of contractors who work with government. And that's the reality of the situation. Now, as a consequence of this, I got stressed the hell out over a long period of time, because I'm having to make potentially life and death decisions whilst being in charge of behavioural interventions, where if I make a mistake when I'm running a person's support network, they may relapse onto heroin, they may burn a house down, all this hectic stuff can happen. And I'm having to do this with a person breathing over my shoulder, trying to find ways for me to pimp their NDIS plans to get as much money as possible while trying to act as ethically as possible. I started breaking down while working there. It was obvious to anyone who worked beside me. I was falling apart at the seams, and by the end of it, I'd have fugue states where I'd find myself in rooms without knowing how I got there. I disassociated for long periods of time, and I've lost around a year of my life because I just haven't been able to function due to mental illness brought on by this insane workload in this horrific corporate culture. The only solution that can fix organizations when they're this bad is to cut off the head of it. Where these organizations, any organization takes their culture from their leader. And the leader in this organization is a man called Ed, and his head needs to roll. Fuck you, Ed. Get the fuck out of the NDIS.